First on our agenda is House File 4. So Representative Gomez, if you want to come on up, I will move that House File 4 be recommended to be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Representative Gomez, I know you do have an A17 amendment. I will move the A17 amendment. Representative Gomez, if you could explain the A17 as well as you can, that would be great.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn and members of the committee. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to explain the A17 very simply because that's what I can do about it. I think if there are further questions, there are some folks here to help me out with those. I mean, basically, like all of the data provisions in House File 4, the amendment is just designed to ensure that the existing, or that personal data is only used for the purposes for which it's intended. We have to collect certain personal information to establish someone's identity and their residence in order to issue a driver's license. And so we just want to make sure that that data is used how it's intended. And my co-author, Representative Perez Vega, has joined us. So we're both thanking you for having us. And yeah, if there are further questions about the amendment, then we might have to phone a friend.
Yeah, it's Nathan Hopkins Day if we need him. Members, any questions to the A17? Representative Johnson.
Chair Becker-Finn, Representative Gomez, I see in the A17 it requires destruction of any data 14 days after it's been validated. What's the current statute and requirements for personal data of normal Minnesota residences with the data and the destruction date?
Representative Gomez, I'm guessing you may want to phone a friend on this one, or do you know the answer?
I would love to, Chair Becker.
All right, Mr. Hopkins.
So, Madam Chair and members, so if you look at the A17 on 1.19, it says notwithstanding section 138.17. That's the state's standard statute with regard to document retention policies that it requires from state agencies. So the Department of Public Safety, which contains the Driver and Vehicle Administration Services Department, they'll have their own document retention schedule that says how long they keep certain information. So I don't know exactly what that says, but this would not withstand that section, which would require them to have a retention schedule. So I'm not sure exactly what the current retention period would be, but this would set it at 14 days.
Follow-up, Representative Johnson.
Chair Becker-Finn, Representative Gomez, that was my concern, because we're setting up a different schedule where the data is kept less time than the data for the regular Minnesota citizens. I think we should have everything equal and everything be the same if we're going to go through this process. But now you're giving special attention to those that aren't here legally.
Response, Representative Gomez or Representative Perez Vega.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn and Representative Johnson. So, the intention here is really just to ensure that data that people provide to access driving privileges are used for that purpose and no other purpose. Thank you.
Any other discussion to the underlying A17 amendment? Representative Grouse.
I understand thank you, Madam Chair. I understand your purpose for it. So with this new knowledge, would you consider changing that to make all things on an equal playing field so that they're retaining that information as long as everyone else's information?
Representative Grossell, I believe that would be we'd have a lot more testifiers here if we were changing everything in that statute, but Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn and Representative Grossell. I mean, I'm sort of submitting the materials like this, and that's my intention, with what we're doing today.
Representative Grossell.
Okay. Your intention is to submit it as is, no changes?
If you're asking if I'm willing to change what I'm presenting, this is the bill before us, and the amendments are what I'm presenting for the committee's consideration today. So I think that's what we're going to be considering.
Yep, and I'll note too that I did extend the amendment deadline because I did realize there was a time crunch with the official and gross edition. So members had plenty of time to file amendments if they would have liked to. And we do have an amendment to the amendment, but any further follow-up on your question, Representative Grosso? Okay. Any other discussion to the A17? Representative Finke.
Thank you, Becker Finn. And I just want to make sure, and perhaps this is being researched right now, but is it longer? Do we know that that's accurate?
Mr. Hopkins.
Madam Chair and members, so I think that the department would have to tell us exactly what their retention schedule says in terms of how long they keep documents and applications regarding other license types, other driver's license types.
Representative Finke.
Okay, I would just like to make sure that what we're hearing is actually the case in statute before we say that that is not being honored by the authors.
Thank you. And with Representative Scott, the A17.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and that was going to be my question. I was going to ask if there's anybody here from DPS that could speak to their retention schedule. I don't know who all the folks are that work for them. I don't.
There is someone here.
There is somebody from there?
If,
I don't know, Madam Chair, if they know the answer to that question.
yeah, and feel free, if you're willing to come up and know the answer, we would love to have the answer. Thank you. All right, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Madam Chair, Representatives, my name is Katie Madigan, and I'm with the Department of Public Safety, Driver and Vehicle Services. And our current retention schedule is 10 years, so we would keep the documents for 10 years before destroying them.
Right, follow-up, Representative Scott.
Well, that is quite a difference and quite an inconsistency. And I've had a longstanding issue with the data retention schedules, and they're all over the place in government, and there's no consistency. And actually, the data retention, is it a commission? There's some body that I'm drawing a blank now on who sets all of that and who is supposed to overlook it. There's a board that is consistent of somebody from the Attorney General's office, somebody from all these different agencies, the courts, everything that's supposed to look at that and scrutinize it on a regular basis, and it's just not happening. But that's why in this committee that oversees data practices, we've often now been saying this is how long you can and can't keep information. We try to put something there, and then if the agency has a pushback, then we always hear about that. But it's a longstanding problem, and the data retention schedule it's not in statute anywhere, so that we can just easily look it up as members of the legislature. But it is really concerning if we have an inconsistency for one set of folks compared to another set of folks in the length of time that data is kept. And one of the things that agencies have to do, I'm sorry, I'm going to give a little mini lesson here, but one of the things that agencies are tasked with in statute is they are supposed to be tasked with keeping that data secure. And so I understand the bill's author wanting to keep a tight rein on this specific data, but at the same time, there really shouldn't be inconsistencies like that. And so I think that's something that we need to look at as a committee, quite frankly, is explore this whole issue in greater depth. It does concern me, Madam Chair, that this is only a 14-day retention schedule for this particular data set compared to everybody else's. So with that, I mean, we are where we are. We didn't know that information until this morning. And Madam Chair, while I've got the floor or the table, I guess, I noticed that the motion was to send this to Ways and Means, and I'm wondering now if these other amendments go on that speak to the Secretary of State and voter, if that shouldn't go to State Gov or the Elections Committee, something like that. It seems to me like that might be, since the amendments that were taken, that might be the course that we might want to consider. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn, and thank you, Representative Scott. Just two things. First, on your last point on the referrals, I did run the language that we're going to be adopting by the elections chair, because it really aligns with kind kind of what's already in place. He doesn't feel like he needs to see it because he doesn't feel like the amendment turns it into an elections bill. So that just FYI, I mean, I understand there could be sort of a differing kind of interpretation of that, but that's what the elections chair is feeling like about the language that you're proposing. And so I just wanted to point out for folks that the term non-compliant license, because this isn't the Transportation Committee, I didn't know this right until I kind of got into this bill, but non-compliant license doesn't refer specifically, it doesn't actually have anything to do with somebody's immigration status. It means that those licenses that are regular Class D licenses and are not enhanced or Real ID. So like I have a non-compliant license, and so the data provisions here would apply to all non-compliant license holders, citizens and non-citizens, regardless of immigration status. So I understand your point about treating different data sets differently, but that's really about those sort of different classes of licenses that are available to people and the level of, or the number of documents that they have to submit in order to get those credentials. Of course, the Real ID stuff is mostly federal law. We don't have a lot of kind of say over that, but just I wanted to clarify that because I think, yeah, I'm not exactly sure if that was clear to you that it's not just for like people who have different immigration statuses for whom that would be the data retention schedule. It's all Class D non-compliant license holders.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since we have a representative here from DPS, I'm wondering if you could give kind of an explanation of why the data retention schedule is 10 years and what your thoughts are, if you have any, on this change to 14 days. And she's looking at somebody above her.
Well, and,
like, am I going to get fired for answering this?
Representative Scott, the issue before us today is whether this A17 amendment's going to go on. We have next week, we're going to get into Chapter 13 in more depth. I know we've got a lot of new members who are not familiar with it. So, we can dig into all those things. But I mean, we could point to all kinds of places where the data retention is different, as you mentioned. So I think before we get too far afield, we've got our work to do in this committee. If somebody has the answer quickly, that's fine. We're getting he does not have the answer quickly. So if you could follow up, I'm not going to parade you down here to say you don't know. If you could follow up with my staff, we can get that information out to folks.
Yeah, my concern, Madam Chair.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, was that evidently there's probably a reason for 10 years, and I don't want to be crippling what they are able to do in the agency by shortening by so significantly. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Finke.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn. And you just said what I was going to say, which is, as a new member, I want to thank Scott for bringing up this data retention inconsistencies. And it sounds like, as someone who's very concerned about data practices, we'll have to take that up. It sounds like a much larger issue than we're dealing with in this amendment today. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Gomez, based on what you said, I'm curious whether there are a number of people whose data who have applied for non-compliant licenses, including yourself, and have data at the department. I'm wondering if this language will require the department to destroy a significant amount of data that they've held for more than 14 days.
Representative Gomez.
Thank you. And I hope that my friend was leaving so that somebody else could come up and field that question. Nobody's standing up to help me out, but I wouldn't know the answer to that question. That's something that DVS would have to help me out with if they were able.
I don't know if it's right. I don't think it's right.
We can roll up another chair. We
Yeah,
don't
maybe
have to
we're
keep, stay put, Representative
Representative
Perez-Vega.
Perez-Vega and I may be calling our friends a lot during this hearing, so.
That's all right. Chapter 13 and data stuff is everybody's favorite topic. Please introduce yourself for the record and go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jordan Haltofterheide, and I'm the Legislative Director for the Department of Public Safety. The bill does not reference if it is retroactive, so at this point in time, I don't believe we would treat it as retroactive, but we'll need to confirm with DVS attorney.
All right. Any follow-up?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. No, that seems like an important thing that we should clear up and get a better understanding of what the effect of that is and whether the department has the resources to actually carry that out if that's a large administrative task that they're going to have after passage of this bill.
Mr. Hopkins.
Madam Chair and members, looking at the first engrossment on page 9, lines 24 to 26, the effective date for the act says that it's effective for driver's licenses and Minnesota identification card application and issuance on or after October 1st, 2023. So I don't believe that there's any intent of retroactivity for any of the provisions in the bill.
Okay, everybody's nodding.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this issue is actually more straightforward than we're thinking it is. The information about the people who are applying for these driver's license is retained. That's one of the main goals of this bill, is to make sure we know who are on our roads, and that's a public safety issue. The only documents that would be destroyed after 14 days are the identity documents that are used to apply for those driver's license. So the issue there is that we don't want that information to be used to determine immigration status by the federal government, because that is not the goal here at our state level. And so just to be clear, all of the information about these people who are applying for these driver's license will be retained according to the normal timeline. It is just the identity documents that they use to apply for those driver's license that would be destroyed.
Thank you, Immigration Attorney Representative Feist. Representative Johnson, and then we're going to move to the amendment
Chair Becker-Finn, members, one of the reasons they keep this data for 10 years is a big problem that we have. I'm sure Representative Grossel in his career in law enforcement has dealt with it. I've dealt with it numerous times, and that's identity theft. How they get the identity theft, and they get driver's license. We have people that have falsified driver's license and gotten driver's license under other people's names. And because they keep that data, they can verify and go back to the verification person, so the person whose identity was stolen, things can be flagged by looking up the records and the documents that they have to verify that they're giving the right person their actual identity back. And without those records, it makes it very difficult to go back and look at things, because it's when somebody steals your driver's license identification, it might be 2-3 years before you find out. And if those records are destroyed, there's no way to get your identity back, and somebody could actually assume your life because the documentation isn't there anymore.
And as we all just learned, apparently it's 10 years. So with that, Representative Scott, I understand there's an amendment to the amendment, the A19. Representative Scott, would you like to move the A19?
Yes, Madam Chair and committee, I would like to move the A19.
Representative Scott, would you like to tell us what the A19 does?
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the bill's author and others that worked on. I submitted the A18, and that got a conversation going about the A18 and what it was trying to accomplish. So this language was I guess compromise language, as we say around here. And what this bill, or what this amendment does, is it just says that the information that does pertain to a person's immigration status can be shared with the Office of the Secretary of State for purposes of making the voter rolls accurate, basically. And this also says that the Office of the Secretary of State cannot disseminate or share that information beyond their office. And so that's what the amendment does. And I did speak with the Secretary of State on the phone last night. I don't know if he was able to get anybody here in the room this morning, but he said he is more than glad to work on this issue going forward if there's any changes to the language that need to happen. So with that, I would ask for member support. He was supported, by the way, but if there's anybody here that wants to speak to that, I don't know.
To our bill author, Representative Gomez, your response on the A19.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Becker-Finn, and thank you so much, Representative Scott, for bringing this amendment forward and working with us kind of late in the evening last night on it. You know, as Representative Scott said, it's just designed to ensure that the existing data sharing relationship between the department and the Secretary of State's office remains intact, just for the purposes of administering elections. So I hope members will support it.
And Madam Chair, thanks.
Representative Scott.
I do want to thank staff who worked on this, both nonpartisan and partisan, who worked on this late into the evening last night, and then we're here for an 8:30 meeting, so thank you.
Yeah, for the record, it wasn't actually that late for how late we sometimes work here at but late for the beginning of session, yes. It did make the 8:15 cutoff in our email inboxes. So, yeah, and I do want to thank everyone for working together. This is how it's supposed to work, that you guys have the conversations and we reach some compromise language. So, Representative Scott, we're going to go on to the A19. So Representative Scott moves the A19 amendment to the A17 amendment. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? If the motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. The amendment to the amendment is adopted. So now back to the underlying A17 amendment. And just to be clear, Representative Scott, so we're not going to be moving the A18. So members can go ahead and recycle that one in their packets.
That would be correct.
All right, thank you. We've already had quite a bit of discussion on the underlying A17, so I'm going to move on to the A17 as amended. All those in favor of the A17 amendment as amended, I'm going to renew my motion on that. Please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
All right, the motion prevails and the amendment as amended is adopted. All right, with that, we will get to the bill in the shape that the authors would like. So we are on House File 4 as amended, and I understand that we do have a couple testifiers, but Representative Gomez, I'll go to you to talk about the bill.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Becker-Finn and members of the committee. House File 4 is driver's licenses for all. It reverts us to pre-2003 Minnesota policy. For decades, up until 2003, people were able to demonstrate that they, through a written and behind-the-wheel test, that they understood the rules of the road and could safely operate a vehicle without regard to immigration status. In 2003, this policy was changed, and so this just allows people access to a driver's license. I just really briefly, we had a hearing, we had heard hours of testimony in the Transportation Committee a couple nights ago. We had an early morning session and then an evening session. We heard from directly impacted people. We heard about what the impacts of not having a license are on someone's life. We heard stories of people being deported for getting pulled over for a brake light that was out and not having a driver's license and getting into those proceedings. We also heard from a wide variety of businesses, including the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. I actually have a letter I'm going to ask the page maybe can hand out. We heard from law enforcement about how this is a public safety issue. We received a letter of support from the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association supporting this bill as submitted yesterday. We heard from faith leaders who talked to us about how this is an issue related to human dignity and respect for everyone's humanity. We heard from labor leaders. And one of the things that somebody pointed out to me was, that in previous years, we heard a lot from people who themselves didn't have access to a driver's license. And on Tuesday, we heard a lot from children, young people whose parents hadn't had access to a driver's license. And that, to me, that was some of the most compelling testimony of hearing, young people talk about what it's like to know that when you're getting in a car with your parents that you might be separated from them. And that kind of the fear and the trauma that, some of these young people were carrying from their early childhood into their young adulthood because of this policy. So, but we really are here today to discuss Article 2, the data protections, which begin on page 10. And as I mentioned, the intent with the data protection provisions were really just to ensure that the personal data that has to be collected is just used for its intended purposes and not other purposes. So I don't know if Rep. Perez-Vega has something she wants to say, but we know
Go
you
ahead,
guys-
go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I just want to address the testimony that was given in transportation, kind of echoing with Representative Gomez stated, but also in regards to a conversation that I held with one of our colleagues in the House, Representative Ethan Chan, who received his driver's license before he became a citizen. And folks like himself who are citizens that had received their licenses prior to becoming citizens, and the challenge that it must be for folks in our immigrant community that want to become citizens, that are working to become citizens, the challenge that it is for them to accomplish that without having a driver's license. The challenges and the fear that go beyond their head of trying to become citizens while they may be pulled over illegally or driving illegally, or that's not an option because they're following the law. And I just want to highlight that and the importance of what good citizenship is allowing to make it easier for folks to be a part of this country who work hard, who have children that are citizens of this country. Deep thought. Muchas gracias. Thank you, member. Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you. We do have a couple testifiers who had signed up, so I'm going to move to them. I have Ms. Vina Iyer. Please introduce yourself and go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn, Lead Scott, Chair Gomez, Representative Perez-Vega, and committee members. I am Vina Iyer. I am the Executive Director of the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, and we are proud to be here to testify in support of HF4, the restoration of driver's licenses for all, and particularly today about the data privacy and protection provisions of this bill, which are critical in this age of ubiquitous data sharing and data mining. The data provisions of this bill, as amended by A17 and A19, primarily amend Minnesota statutes 171.12, the main data privacy and disclosure section of the driver's licensing statute. The bill adds a subdivision 1 to section 171.12, which prohibits DPS from sharing certain information collected during the driver's licensing process, particularly information related to citizenship and immigration status. Walking through the data privacy provisions of the bill and the amendments, I'll start first with the first engrossment, then turn to the A17 and then the A19. In the first engrossment of the bill, Article 2, Section 4, adds that subdivision 11 that I was talking about. It prohibits DVS from releasing information that identifies or has the effect of identifying an individual's citizenship status or lawful presence outside of DVS. Next, turning to your attention to the A17. This provides additional detail regarding the type of information that is generally prohibited from release under the new Section 171.12, Subdivision 11. This provision requires that prior to the disclosure of any data regarding a non-compliant driver's license, regardless of who has that license, DPS or its agents must obtain a certification that the recipient will not use the data for civil immigration purposes or disclose the data to an immigration enforcement agency. It also establishes penalties for the violation pursuant to the Data Privacy Act. Finally, turning to the A19 amendment, this amendment clarifies and has been discussed already that that this bill would maintain that data sharing relationship between DVS and the Secretary of State. In short, the data privacy provisions of this bill and the amendments focus on placing strict restrictions on sharing data that could be used to identify an applicant's citizenship or immigration status. The provisions ensure that the routine act of applying for a driver's license does not open the door to deportation and family separation. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next on the list, I have Linus Chan. Please introduce yourself and go ahead with your testimony.
Good morning. Thank you very much Chair Becker-Finn, and the rest of the committee for having me. My name is Linus Chan. I teach at the University of Minnesota Law School, and I run a clinic that represents people held in immigration detention by ICE. I'm here specifically to talk about why these provisions are so necessary and what is actually happening both nationally and in other states. And I want to turn attention to a couple things. One, there was a report that was issued by Georgetown, which was entitled Immigration Dragnet, that really details exactly and how information such as driver's information is being used in a certain amount of database and for immigration enforcement. To give an idea of the scope and the expansion of the use of this data, I want to point to the fact that in 2008, the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement specifically spent around $75 million on data analysis and getting data. In 2021, that number expanded to over $400 million. Part of that, much of that spending has been in the creation and the use of databases, but it also includes about $50 million on spending for data brokers. One of the important provisions of this bill and this amendment specifically, which is to prevent the reselling of data from private data brokers such as LexisNexis in order to do so. And I wanted to give a couple really quick idea of what's going on here. So because of this access on driver's information, it's estimated that 1 in 3 adults, or over 88 million people, drivers in the United States, ICE has their information already. There is increased push to get access to facial recognition that is also stored with the databases of a lot of state driver's license. And this is already happening in terms of other states and having access to driver's license and registration information. And so really I want to emphasize here that while it may seem that this data practices protection is only for specific members of the community, one thing I want to highlight to everybody is in order to track non-citizens, what has to happen is it means that citizens are tracked as well. So any sort of restriction and protection of data for any members of the community helps every member of the community. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Representative Scott, was this for this testifier?
Actually, I have a question for him and the previous testifier.
Okay, I've got a
real quick.
list going, so
Okay.
we'll get to you.
Yep.
All right. And thank you, Mr. Chan, for your testimony. With that, are there any members of the public who did not sign up who would like to testify? Please
Madam Chair.
Introduce yourself for the record and go ahead with your testimony.
Madam Chair, my name is Rich Neumeister. I have 2 points. One is if you look at 17112 subdivision 7, which is not in the bill, you will see that there's the Federal Privacy Protection Act, which was done because of a tragedy almost 20 years ago with actress Maria Soledano. That certain restrictions of how data can be, driver's license data can be disseminated. So my first question is, how will this impact that dissemination to all those parties for insurance purposes, for service of process, all those kinds of things? And what kind of new standards will there be for that? Again, we're not talking about documents. We're talking about basic information, name and an address. For law enforcement purposes, and generally, as we all know about the computer systems, they get the photo. And some other of those private entities may get the photo. So that's my first question. And then just on the second point in terms of the A17 amendment. If you look on lines 219 and 220, it's just the point I raised, again, for you as policymakers to know what this may mean or have impact on. Person means anybody in law. Requires is something, and then to certify that the person must not use the data for civil immigration purposes. So then I go back now to that 17112, subdivision 7, that, Madam Chair, your council may be able to tell you what those exceptions are. Those parties that get that data, if that is not impeded with any other part of this law, will that be then the new standard? So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I just throw out to you 2 points that I think that are important to at least you as policymakers to know and questions to be answered for the public.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Any other members of the public wishing to testify? All right, not seeing any, we will move on to member discussion. We'll remind everybody that our discussion and the reason that this bill is here is Article 2. Done a pretty good job so far of sticking to Article 2, so we're going to keep that up. First on the list, I have Representative Feist.
I'm so sorry, Madam Chair, but it wasn't a data thing. I just wanted to say that I strongly support this bill.
Representative Feist, we're going to follow the rules.
That's fair.
Representative Scott.
Wow, harsh.
Just remember this when you guys do the same thing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a question, one question for each of the previous testifiers, Ms. Iyer and Mr. Chan.
All right. They didn't go far.
They didn't. They were very handy.
They both.
Oh, they're going to share the chair?
We got lots.
Go one at a time. It's okay.
All right. All right. All right. So Representative Scott, your question from
Thank you.
Director
Thank you, Ms. Ayers. I'm wondering what your thoughts are. One of the things that this committee has done in the past is when we're setting up this data sharing thing, one of the things that we also do is to create some sort of a requirement for an audit or an audit trail so that the public has a way of going back and making sure that the law is being followed. Is that anything that, and maybe this is to the bill author too, is that something that you believe would be belt and suspenders here? Because I think it should be common practice anytime that we're sharing data, in government, that an audit trail should be required. There should be role-based access to that information. There should be, as you put in here, you put the date for the data to be, purged, and then some sort of a data report summary to the public so that they know that the law is actually being followed. So, Ms. Ayers, I know that's a big mouthful from me, but your thoughts, if you have any.
Representative Gomez, I apologize when Representative Gomez asked what she needed to do to prepare for this committee. I did not warn you that she was going to ask about audit trails. Director Iyer, if you're able to answer that question.
Thank you so much, Representative Scott. I'm actually going to defer to Mr. Chan on that question. So thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Chan.
Thank you, Representative Scott. I actually helped work on a similar provision in Virginia, and the Virginia data practice did require specific audit trails and audits. One of the things that we learned is that audits, unfortunately, really depend very strongly on whether and how much the individual agencies decides to do those audits. So which is why is an alternative to the audits is what requiring the penalty provisions and specifically the right of action. We feel that those are very strong indicators of preventing people or bad faith actors from breaking these particular data privacy protections. There is nothing, in my understanding, and please if Department of Public Safety could correct me, from the Department of Public Safety from conducting audits on their own and making sure those are there, but it wasn't as high of a priority in terms of making it into this amendment specifically. We recognize its value and its use, and I certainly would agree that they are important, but we found that the other provisions and the penalty provisions may be more effective in preventing the release of that data.
And I understand Mr. Hopkins may have some information for us as well.
Madam Chair, Representative Scott, and members. So Section 171.12, which will contain the new subdivision 11, which you see in the A17 amendment. That's the section that deals with data practices for driver's licenses. And subdivision 1A of that section, which isn't amended in the bill, which is current law, requires DVS to have role-based access for its driver and vehicle services information system. It requires audit trails and it already requires an independent biennial audit. So those things will also pertain to these new non-compliant licenses as well.
With my law professor hat on, we'll always remind members, if you go back and look at the overall statute, a lot of times you can get the answers if you have time to do that. Representative Scott.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Hopkins, for that answer. Because my response to you, Mr. Chan, was going to be, the penalties are fine, but how is a person ever going to know if there's no audit trail created? How are they going to know who's responsible for sharing or mis-sharing your information? Thank you. And Ms. Ayers, one question that I had is, how will the agents, and maybe this again is for the author too, how will the DVS agents and those folks, how will they know what can be shared and what can't? How will that be explained, and how will they be educated to know the answer to that question?
Director Iyer.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn. Thank you, Representative Scott. That would be a matter of, I think, both a matter of training and whether that would be issues that would be addressed in administrative rulemaking. But frankly, I think it would be mostly a training issue to make sure that they understand those issues.
Thank you.
All right. Not seeing any other members on the list. Representative Gomez, Representative Perez Vega. Any closing remarks on House File 4?
Just our thanks for your consideration, Madam Chair and members. And again, thank you to Representative Scott for working with us.
All right. With that, we'll move on to the vote. I will renew my motion that House File 4, as amended, be recommended to be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The motion prevails, and the bill is on its way to Ways and Means. Thank you, members.